Security cannot be limited to just security teams. High-impact strategies need to engage everyone, from employees to the board of execs, DevOps teams, legal, and IT. But this is not without its challenges. How do you communicate effectively to get a seat at the table? How do you motivate teams outside of security to become security champions? And how do you build trust and credibility in your professional relationships to prove that cybersecurity can and should be a business amplifier, not an impediment? We're answering all of this and more with our all-star panel comprised of experts in leadership, security, and risk and compliance.
Hello all and welcome. Security as a function has undergone a huge amount of change recently. The increased recognition of the importance of cyber has elevated the role of the CISO within the organization. And then the pandemic has meant security leaders have really had to step up and become strategic stakeholders within businesses, not only securing, but also enabling remote workforces. Both of these factors has led to increased visibility for CISOs and their teams. And on this journey from back office technical operations to more core strategic players, it's now more important than ever that security leaders are building the right strategic relationships to succeed. Put simply, security can no longer be limited to security teams. CISOs need to act as change agents, engaging, partnering, and influencing all areas of the business to implement a truly effective security strategy. CISOs don't just need a leading security strategy, they need a relationship plan to build effective and trust relationships with the CEO, the GC, CFO, the list goes on. And a recent report from BT Security would suggest that we're not yet doing a good enough job. Less than 50% of employees and execs could identify and name who their CISO was. But the good news is we're here to help today. We're going to start today by looking at how you plan which relationships you need to be focusing on to ensure your strategies are successful. So let's begin by looking at a framework that we use at Tessian to ensure that we're consciously building the right relationships to set ourselves up for success. The Relationship 15 framework is a personal development tool to help map the core strategic relationships needed to be successful. Essentially, it's about thinking who, both within and also outside of your organization, do you need to be cultivating relationships with in order to ensure your own success, your team's success, and continued growth in your career. Now, as we go through this session and speak to the panelists, I want you all to be thinking about who would fall into your Relationship 15. Who do you need to be focusing on building relationships with now, and what type of relationships do they need to be? And in fact, you can download the framework from the resources panel if you want to start putting pen to paper. And a bit of a spoiler alert, there'll be some homework to do later, so you can get a head start there. Now, here to discuss this topic with me, we have some amazing panelists, all of whom which bring a slightly different angle to building, cultivating relationships. So let's kick off with intros. Perhaps, Gaynor, I can hand over to you first, then Annick, then Patricia.
Hi, I'm Gaynor Rich. I'm one of the global directors of cybersecurity here at Unilever. I look after strategy and transformation.
My name is Annick O'Brien. I am a certified cyber risk officer, a compliance officer, and a lawyer, which all sounds very boring and academic.
Hello, my name is Patricia Patton, and I'm delighted to be here. I am an executive coach, and I work throughout Silicon Valley and globally all over the world. So I'm delighted to be here. This is my secret sauce. This is what I'm passionate about, and I'm very excited to have this conversation with you.
Guys, thank you so much. I'm really excited to get stuck into some of this stuff. And Patricia, I want that secret sauce straight away. So I'm going to turn straight back to you. And such a key, the whole premise of the Relationship 15 is identifying those key relationships that you need to be successful. I'd love to understand your views and how do you begin about that exercise? Where do you start? There are so many people that influence our working lives. How do you evaluate who's in your relationship 15?
Well, what I'm most excited about with the framework, Relationships 15, is it gives you an opportunity to be intentional about the relationships that you're going to want to build. And oftentimes it's very transactional. We get so busy. And so we say, oh, well, I have to meet this person. But all we're doing is talking about business. We're talking about, okay, how do we get things done? With being intentional, you have to embody and embrace the whole notion that relationships really matter.
That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Patricia.
Welcome.
I think it gives us a really good basis. And I love that. Yeah, I think the intentional element and then so much about building empathy like really, really resonates there. What I would love to do now is like switch gears slightly and try and understand how that applies in practice in the security world, which I'm sure is going to resonate very well with some of the audience today. Gaynor, perhaps we can start with you and then on to Annick. What relationships are crucial for security success within an organization? Like maybe frame it another way. Who would be in your relationship 15? What are the key stakeholders that you need to win over to be successful as a security professional?
I think it's a very broad question. I'd agree with Patricia, but you need to really understand the business and understand what the business is trying to do and what those people in the business are trying to deliver. So it's important to have those connections with the people at the sharp end to understand what some of their challenges are, because security can sometimes be a little bit binary and can be a little bit compliance focused, whereas actually we're there as a business enabler. So building those relationships, I think, is absolutely key. I would always, Annick would always be on my in my 15, because privacy and security must work hand in hand. It's a partnership relationship, and we can leverage each other's skills and knowledge, but we can support each other at the same time. And we've often got very common goals to deliver. But that extends out to even our colleagues in audit would be in the same category, because again, they can help and support us, and they are there equally to help the business. But you need to understand, work very closely with the board and understand what the board's objectives are. That goes along hand in hand with the organisational objectives, because as part of the security function for any organisation, you're there to enable the business to do business securely and to achieve those objectives. So that sort of alignment supports that progression towards a common goal, a common objective with any of the key stakeholders that Patricia was talking about, and that building that empathy, because if you're in the same space, you can help them understand some of the challenges and some of the objectives you're trying to deliver as a common objective. It's considering, gosh, it is such a broad area. I would also think it's important for me to understand what my peers are doing in other organisations. And as a cybersecurity community, we connect quite extensively now. I think it's grown exponentially over the years. But being able to understand and engage with your peers who are in similar industries or who understand some of the challenges you have, we learn from each other. We share experiences. It can help shortcut some of the challenges so that we don't. If someone else has had a problem, we can learn from that problem, and we can not make the same mistakes, really. So there are some very, very core fundamentals, but really from a strategic perspective, for me, it is understanding the peers and understanding the business objectives and working very closely with core third parties. And from a core perspective, it's right there in the business, the privacy, the legal team, the supply chain, and those business leaders really would be in my 15.
Yeah, that's
I
amazing.
would fully
I love
agree
that
with
idea.
that.
Sorry, Annick, carry on, please.
So I just wanted to say that I fully agree with what Gaynor is talking about, just in terms of your business, really understanding your business value chain. How does your business make money? And it also depends on the maturity of your business. So if you're starting in a business where you don't have relationships or you have bad relationships, you're really looking to create a new type of relationship with the people who are the most important to you. You can't create relationships with everybody instantly. It takes time and it takes effort. And it also involves a little bit of you showing your value to the business. So not all of the relationship building is you going to them to try and convince them to do something for you, but rather you going and trying to do a little bit extra, whereas it might not be your primary project, but it helps them solve a problem, and it helps show them that you are a part of the team. You're working together and you're in it with them. Exactly what Patricia was saying about this person cares about the company, and then that makes them more receptive to doing something for you. And then further, to build on what Patricia was saying about communication and having influence, I think traditionally a lot of privacy sits in legal departments and a lot of data protection sits in infosec departments. And traditionally the people who work in these departments are people who have a very rational and logical way of communicating that is layered with information. And the way that they communicate to boards and to their HR colleagues or their marketing colleagues reflects how they appreciate people communicating to them. But to take again Patricia's point of self-awareness, we know how we communicate. We know how we best receive information. But what we also have to be conscious of is, how do our colleagues receive that information? And if we are dealing with communicators that are more empathetical or emotional in the way they communicate, if they communicate in terms of big ideas and not really in terms of details, we've got to pitch all of what we want to do in key terms that they will receive, because communication is not about the deliverance. As Patricia said, it's about listening. It's about the reception of information and how we process it and what we do with that information.
Yeah, I think a key point to that, I totally agree. Again, the communication is important, but I think, and the key part of that is by building these relationships, you put your the security into business terms. So you're explaining it in business terms. It's not a load of technical speak that's coming at someone who really doesn't understand necessarily, because it's not their core area of expertise. So we have to be able to understand the business and translate what we're trying to say into a common language.
Yep. And the same goes for legal. So we don't want to just spurt out articles of the GDPR or whatever legislation it is, but we really want to say to the business, okay, what we need to do in order to continue our business running effectively, sustainably, and profitably is this, this, and this. And that's how we go about it.
And how you do this as a coach, I'm always going back to building your strengths, leveraging your strengths, and to mitigate some of your weaknesses. When you go into a meeting with executives or with board members, two things, there are two E's that you need. The first E is executive voice. And I think both panelists have just spoken to that. And what that really means is understanding what you're trying to relay to the executives, but framing it in the business context, coming in with strategic intention, looking around the table and understanding who's invested where, what's important to them, what kind of leverage and impact are they getting. And there's only a small pot of, well, sometimes it's a large pot of revenue. So how are we going to expend that revenue across the organization? How are we going to stay safe, but at the same time, how are we going to build our product? How are we going to build our customer base? So when you go in, understanding why you're there and speaking to those issues that they're bringing to you in business speak, I think is really important. And the second E is around executive presence. And I do a lot of work around that. And that's not stylized. It's not you're coming in pretending. What it is basically is that you're able to pivot. You're able to stay composed. You're able to align with the leadership in a way where you understand what role you're playing at the table. And you don't want to just come in as an advisor. You want to be a part of that team, helping them. And how you get to be a part of that team are a couple of ways. I worked for a prime minister. I was a principal advisor for a prime minister of a country. And one of the things that I wanted to do was not be the principal advisor. I wanted to be the trusted advisor. And so how you do that is you make sure that when you bring a problem, you have a solution. When when you're delivering something, you're delivering it in a way that the narrative is tight and it's very, very compelling to the things that's top of mind for that executive. And the one thing that's top of mind is they don't want surprises. The prime minister didn't want surprises. The CEOs I work with and exec teams, they don't want surprises either. They want to understand the value prop. They want to understand the value prop and what that means to them so that they're able to do their business effectively. So when you become a trusted advisor, you figure out how to leverage your voice at that table, and do not lose your edge if it goes in a different direction. For example, I was in a meeting as a coach of the CEO, observing the dynamics, and one person came in, really powerful person, but they lost their executive presence because the CEO got very upset with the information they gave, that the individual gave, and just started ranting, and they got into a big debate and everyone was talking. It was a beautiful moment. And the reason why the CEO got so intense was that information was new. He hadn't factored that in. And so therefore the business strategy needed to be retooled. And that person actually brought a gift in. But instead of staying with that, working through that, not letting the emotionality of the moment get them to actually lead that conversation, they recoiled back. And therefore it kind of drifted a little bit, and then it landed in a way it needed to land. But that person really could have stepped in there and took control of that without controlling, and set everyone on the path to understanding what the upside of what that information meant, and then how do you get to a resolution and solve it. That would have really, by keeping that presence, by having that executive voice, would have really brought that person to the table in a much quicker way, and they would have been seen as a trusted advisor and an asset that the exec team and boards want to make sure that they're there for these kinds of discussions and situations.
I love that. And I think so many parallels with security professionals as well, who are often in situations where there may be high stakes situations or potential risks on the horizon. And you have to balance that executive strategic outlook with also the risks that are happening. Guys, amazing discussion. I have one more question, and perhaps, Annick, we could start with you, and Gaynor, anything that you can add would be great as well. CISOs in many ways are so collaborative across the organization, all the different teams they touched, and we've gone into that a little bit today. We'd love to understand your advice to any members of the audience of who are the kind of key people in the organization that you should maybe partner with to help amplify the message, or the story that you're trying to tell internally. And Annick, I start with you because I know that DPO is a great partner for a CISO, and actually maybe you can join forces, and it's not just about building relationships with each other, but it's about going out as a unit and as a team.
Quite. Well, I try and always make the CISO in organizations my best friend, whether they like it or not. but it is very important that security and privacy, they're just looking at the same thing from a different angle, and all privacy problems and all privacy solutions need to align with how the information security of the business is running. So anything that we're looking for the business to do needs to be completely aligned with how our InfoSec colleagues want it to be done. And I often say that DPO often sits in a legal department, and InfoSec often sits in a tech department, and there should be a third department, a data protection department, where all of these people can come together and really work on solving the challenges that come to the business. So obviously the CISO would be on my list, but somebody that I always like to work with, two departments that I always make sure I work with, are internal comms and HR, Because if you want to change something in a business, it's the people. And I mentioned this earlier about behind every computer is a person. So behind every business are the people who work in the business. HR and internal comms are going to help you to get that message out to the business and then help you with the training, awareness, communication and support to the business so that you can follow up on the change management that you are trying to instill.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better myself. The first person I would always seek out is the CPO in any business as well, and say make them my best friend, whether they want me or not. But I do normally find it a sort of mutual relationship because we do support each other. We're often got the same agendas, and you know, for us it's is a really good springboard relationship across the organisation, and within Unilever, you know, there's two different networks. You've got the DPO has got a huge network across a global organisation, and I've built similar here as well from a cybersecurity perspective, and that gives us both a business and an IT view of the world, and that has enabled us to have eyes and ears on the ground globally, and also a great feedback process within the organisation. And they really do give us unvarnished feedback, but that enables us to communicate effectively with the organisation and really relate to people. So from a security standpoint, it can sound quite clinical when you're talking about cybersecurity, and everyone, it's very military in its language. It's, you know, it's attackers and defense and all of that sort of thing, which doesn't really sort of excite people, to be honest, and doesn't get them it's not the sexiest sell in the world, to put it that way. And you sort of, so I've sort of taken an approach of trying to market cybersecurity to an organisation which is largely made up of marketeers, and to do that, you need to relate. So we need to be able to communicate in a language that resonates with people and makes it human for them and real. And that is where you sort of step out the boundaries of the organisation. Because for me, for cybersecurity to resonate with people, it needs to relate to their personal life as much as their work life. I don't want people to have to think, oh, I've got to put this hat on because I've come through the door of the office today. And that message sort of really resonates in this COVID period because their office is their home. And so helping them understand cybersecurity to protect their families, to protect themselves, to protect their friends, as much as to protect the organisation, is a key part of that. So communications, I would say, is definitely always a good friend. I mean, I've personally, I brought somebody into the team to support communications, but I deliberately selected a communications professional because I can teach them cybersecurity. I can't necessarily get somebody whose expertise is in the technology and the cybersecurity space. You know, that you can't expect them to be a communications specialist as well. So the skills meld together, and you know, we learn on that journey, and it enables us to communicate more effectively. And I think that is really important to me. But yeah, building relationships. Anybody who is involved in the organisation, I think, is touched by cybersecurity. So I'm out there trying to make friends as wherever I go, really, because you never know when those relationships will become useful.
So true.
I love that. I think that it's so great to hear security and data protection professionals saying it's all about the comms, it's all about the journey, because at the end of the day, it's completely a people problem. I mean, you know, it's music to our ears at Tessian, but if you can't get people on that journey, then you're fighting a losing battle. No longer can you put them in a situation where you have to like lock people down, or you have to put controls on them and just expect that they'll do them. It's about empowering users, and it's about, you know, as leaders and as security leaders, like helping them see the journey that they're going on and why it's good for them. So that's amazing. Patricia, would love to kind of like swing that back to you, bringing people on that journey, creating that narrative, connecting with people across the organization when in isolation, it might feel like, whoa, security, I don't need to worry about security. That's not my job. Would love any like tips or tricks or situations you've come across in the past that you've really seen effective ways of bringing people on that journey?
Well, They are isolated. And I believe making that connection, finding creative ways to connect. It doesn't have to be, we're going to have a meeting on cybersecurity today. We're going to have a meeting on how you're feeling. How secure are you feeling? What are some of the pain points that you're experiencing? How can I help you? What is it that you need? Just at a human level. And then you can talk about one of the things that you don't want to have to worry about is being hacked or things happening to you that you are going to feel lost at because you don't have the support right around the corner around your cube. And so just having those one-on-one conversations, pick people that may not be in your sphere of influence, like on your framework 15, the relationship 15, but people who you really need to get to know, because it's a two-way street. By you getting to know them, that strengthens your executive voice because you can ask critical questions. You can understand what's really happening within the organization with sales teams or marketing teams or customer success teams or product teams, just individuals that are under the radar, but have a wealth of information and that you need them to actually execute. So taking that time, it would really be a surprise to get a invite from you saying, hey, love to sit down with you. Love to hear how you're feeling. What are your pain points? What are you worried about? What are you feeling like you can't access right now? As a lead-in to be able to talk about more in a substantive way, how can they secure the work that they're doing? And so reaching out, I would say, is the first thing. The second thing is joining other teams, being part of other teams, having one-on-one with their direct managers and sitting down and saying, hey, look, I know this is what I'm doing, but I'm also interested in how your team is functioning. How are they feeling? And being part of that and figuring out ways maybe to creatively come together to talk about how do you feel secure from working from home, being disconnected, and then how do we make sure that there's security around the things that you are doing so that it doesn't create problems for the whole business. And you can come up with all kinds of ways to do that in social, virtual kind of social events, making sure you're present, making sure you're there, and thinking about a narrative that's positive, putting it in a positive framework, rather than this is what we want to avoid. This is what we want to come to. This is what we want to do. This is what's going to help us prosper. Getting your language of validation that is optimistic. People are dying for hope. They're dying for some sense of it's not doom and gloom. They're not all going to come after me. It's that we're going to make sure no one bothers the serenity that we're creating here because you're not alone. And if you could speak to that and get outside of that hat you wear and just come in and be inspirational, wow, wouldn't that be something to have someone from cybersecurity come in and actually inspire me? Oh, wow. And then when you have to come back and tell me, that little link there and how you're using your computer is not a good thing, they have seen you in a different way. So getting outside of the box and getting creative is something that I think everybody's open for anything. Yeah. I've never seen a time where people are more open to wanting to experience humanity, a sense of connection as they are now. And so I think you have the ability to do that if you want to get creative and really figure out how to do it. So I challenge you to try that because I've seen it work.
I really like that.
That is a great.
I'm laughing because one thing that I like to do and I encourage others to do is to gate crash other people's parties. Do not be shy. As a lawyer, if I want training to happen effectively, and I say to everybody, the legal department is training you on GDPR, come at noon, nobody will arrive. I will be alone in that meeting room. That doesn't even I don't want to be there. That sounds boring to me. However, if the marketing department are having their biannual summit and they're talking about how their different marketing projects are working. And I have invited myself, with the assistance of the head of marketing, to attend that conference, to be there with them, to understand what makes them work. And I have a slot, hopefully not the after lunch slot, but look, any slot will do, because I'm happy just to be there. If I get a slot, what I say in that slot has 100 times more impact than whatever I could have said in that legal GDPR meeting. So really, it's about getting into other people's agendas and other people's their lives, and popping up and saying, oh, just one thing. And that's how you get your message really effectively across. I think that's what's worked for me.
I think that is, please.
Sorry, I was going to just come back to your point about asking questions. I think it's really important, because from a security perspective, we often tend to be going in telling everybody how they should be doing things or how they shouldn't be doing things. And I think it's actually more important to go in and ask those questions, and go in not from a position of here I am to tell you all the things you need to know, but actually go in there and firstly, in building the relationship, ask lots of questions. You need to understand their perspective, because that way you can look at it much more from a risk-based perspective. As I say, I keep saying security isn't binary. You have to look at it on a risk spectrum, and each organisation is different. A highly regulated organisation will have a very different risk appetite and perspective to a market stall, for example. You're going to be in a different place, and you need to understand the context. And asking lots of questions and understanding before you start deciding what they should be doing or how they should be doing it is a really, really important thing. And we don't get invited to many parties either, Annick, because we tend to be known as the no police. So, we're all in the same spot.
Trash it.
Or rather, you get invited, but you don't get invited back.
I'll take every opportunity available to me too, and just get in there and even get in there under a false premise, but get in there and say your pitch. But I think that really works well, because you've then been invited into their world to talk about something, rather than trying to preach from on high, I guess, is the best analogy I can come up with.
Well, one thing I want to leave, Go ahead, Henry.
Patricia.
No, I just wanted to say one thing I want you all to remember and to embrace is what Maya Angelou, the great poet, said. She said that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And so that is something that if you just embrace that and think through that lens, I think that you'll get invited to those parties.
That is a phenomenal quote to leave the session on. I wanted to say thank you so much to all of our panelists. You've made my job incredibly easy today, and a very, very interesting discussion. I think we can conclude, it is so important to gatecrash parties to succeed in security, and what an amazing takeaway. Before we finish up, I wanted to say to everyone in the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion as much as I have. Now, this is your turn to put this into action. As I mentioned, the Relationship 15 is available to download in our resources panel. It's also going to be available on a blog that we'll be releasing very shortly. Would really encourage you to download that framework. As Patricia said, have intent. Think about who those relationships are you want to build, and then check in every month or so and see how you're doing in relation to that. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much to our panelists. Kelly, back to you.